Who is pumped about year end? Yes, yes. Nice. Okay. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Diane Seider. I have been working here at Turnkey for a little over 9 years now. So I'm one of the resident long-termers, lifers. And I'm going to talk about the year-end close process today. So here's our agenda. We're going to talk about some new features. Then we're going to go through each module in the order that they should be closed. So we'll start out with inventory, and then at the very end, we'll talk about payroll. All right, so some new features. It jumped, didn't it? It's okay. So how many people are still on a version older than 2013? Is anybody on 2010? Anybody on 2010? Okay, so there are a few. So new features in 2013 or newer. We have the ability now to close unit accounts, so those are your statistical accounts. We can clear the balances out when we close the year. That's big because before that we'd have to run a script typically for you guys to clean that out. Next new feature is in the year-end close window, you have the option to control how inactive zero balance accounts are treated. So I think Carrie mentioned this when she was talking about tips and tricks. We are able now to remove any inactive GL accounts, but with some qualifications. So, for example, if an inactive account has transaction history on it, even if the box is not checked, it's not going to remove it. So it's only zero balance accounts that really have never been used in your system. And then the big thing, this is my favorite new feature when it comes to year-end close, is the progress bar that's been added to the year-end close window, because that was always huge. You wouldn't know if it was working. It always looked like it hung. People would get nervous. So yeah, close out. Then, you know, bad things happen. So. Okay. So to complete the year-end close process, we need to, it's recommended that we close the modules in the following order. We start with inventory, then we do the sales receivables module, then we do purchasing/payables, fixed assets, and then finally GL. And then obviously the payroll year-end is independent of these other modules because that's based on, you know, your last pay period of the current year and all that. So, something to note. Prior to closing the inventory module, it is highly recommended that we run reconcile on sales order processing, purchase order processing, and then the inventory modules. So, SOP, POP, then inventory. The reconcile is found under the utilities section of those windows. So when should the close be done? The inventory module should be closed at the end of your fiscal year before any new transactions that would affect inventory quantities are posted for the new year. So as close to your fiscal year end as possible. That's because, and here's why. It's slow when I hit, that's why I'm looking at it. So some of the things the inventory module year-end close does, it transfers all summarized current year quantity, cost, sales amounts to the last year column. It also updates each item's beginning quantity, zeroes out the quantity sold field, And then it also gives you the option to remove discontinued items, sold receipts, sold lot attributes, and to update item standard cost. Yes, question?
So if your annual physical inventory is in the new year and not being the first or second, like maybe that first weekend, that's going to...
So the question is, if you have a physical inventory scheduled for maybe like the first, after the first full week of the new year, so maybe like the 5th, 6th, okay. What you can do is if there are inventory transactions that, you're processing for 2017, if you can process them but leave them in batches and maybe don't post them, would be the recommendation. Anything for 2016, obviously you want to post and get in, but if you have stuff, related to 2017, you can leave it in batches and just don't post it until after the module. I know sometimes it's a little hard.
That would include sales transactions?
Yeah. Purchasing. Yeah. So I know it's always hard. It's hard on the purchasing side, on the sales side, on the inventory side, to pick a really good cutoff date, because you always have, if you do it too soon, you're missing some 2016 transactions that maybe, the paperwork is lost or, something. If you wait too long, you've got too much 2017 activity, so it's kind of a balancing act. So here's an example of what the module, when we close the module, what it really affects. So here's a couple of screenshots from GP that show some of the fields that are affected. So in my top screenshot, I have a smart list, inventory quantity smart list, and some of the fields, that quantity sold field in my smart list is affected when I close the module. So I just wanted to highlight that. Also, on the item quantity maintenance window down here, you see the sold for 2016 would get zeroed out when I close the module. So at the end of this presentation, there's a list of KB articles, Microsoft knowledge base articles, and references that you guys can go to for additional assistance. But what steps should you take to close the year for inventory? We should enter and post all purchase order processing transactions, all invoice or sales order transactions, and all inventory transactions for the current year. Like I said, if you have stuff coming in, obviously you're not going to stop your business in 2017, but you can enter it and just kind of keep it in batches and don't post, if it's possible. I mean, sometimes it's not. So, key points to remember. It's always good when you're closing the modules to have a good backup at the beginning. I know Microsoft recommends you do a backup before you close each module, but if you're closing them consecutively, within the same few hours, as long as you have one good backup before you start, you should be good. Because if something happens, if something gets interrupted, you always want a backup to go back to if we need it. Most of the time you don't need it, but it's the time you don't have the backup when there may be a problem. So for those of you that are using inventory, does everybody now have the historical inventory trial balance report? Is there somebody that does not have that report or maybe doesn't know where it is? I'll take that as everybody has it. Yes? Okay. I know for people that have used GP for quite a while, you have to actually turn it on and you have to go through a whole process to get it up and running, and it can be kind of painful. So Yeah. So let us know if we can help in any way, if you guys are running into things and getting stuck. So here's a few knowledge-based articles. Again, this PowerPoint can be emailed out, so then you'll be able to just click on the links, or you can write the KB article, number down, and then you can put that in your Google search, and it'll pop up. Just gives you additional information. If you've closed inventory twice, if you run into some kind of errors, it's like frequently asked questions. Okay, so we've gotten through inventory. And so now we've moved on to sales and the receivables side. So for both receivables and purchasing, we have the calendar and the fiscal year-end close. They can be run separately. So if you are on a fiscal calendar other than calendar year, you would close your fiscal year as close to your fiscal year-end as possible, and then the calendar year-end obviously as close to 12/31 as possible. So here's just a picture of the year-end close for receivables. You see I have both fiscal and calendar, so I can pick which or do both at the same time. So what does the receivables year-end close process affect? The calendar year-end close clears the finance charges. A lot of your customer data is moved. Again, it's year-to-date sales, last year's sales. All of those buckets of information get moved and adjusted for fiscal. Calendar year-end just affects finance charges, and basically that's it. So here's an example. If you're in a customer view under an inquiry screen, you have this drop down here where mine is set to amount since last close. So that means the physical date that I closed the module. In this window, you can change the drop down to actually view this information on a calendar or fiscal year. But where the year-end close, or where closing the module timely really comes into play, is again in our smart list reports, because these last year, like high last year balance, average days to pay for the year for last year, these only get updated when I close my module. So that's why it's important. Yes, ma'am, Dana?
So are those based on calendar year or fiscal year? Or can you change it?
These are based on just the last date you closed the module, regardless of.
So if we have both, calendar and.
If you have both, if you're like on a fiscal calendar, like 6/30 or whatever, you should close the module as close, the fiscal calendar as close to 6/30 as possible. These amounts update on the fiscal.
Okay. So if you have a fiscal year end, you should not run a calendar year end. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, you should run the fiscal year end as close to your fiscal year end date as possible, and calendar year end as close to 12/31 as possible. You should run both, but the fiscal year end close is what updates most of these columns. The calendar year end, just for receivables, I think only updates finance charges. Bless you. So two separate closes. For those of you fortunate enough to have your fiscal calendar be 12/31, you only do it once. So what steps should you take? You should post all transactions for the current year. Again, if you're waiting a few days into 2017, you'll want to save those transactions in a batch and just don't post until you are able to close the module. Key points to remember. Again, if you're maybe not using inventory, or you closed inventory yesterday and now we're closing receivables, you want a good backup before you start the process. So receivables management is not completely date sensitive, and that's why we want to close as close to our fiscal or calendar year end as possible. Here are some good KB articles again to help you if you have any questions or run into any issues and you want to try to troubleshoot them yourself before calling us. All right, so we've gotten through inventory and receivables. We are just cooking, rolling right along, and now we're at payables. So again, payables is similar to receivables, where it has both a fiscal and a calendar year-end process. Calendar year-end routine obviously should be run as close to the calendar year-end as possible. That affects like 1099 amounts this year, last year, in the smart list. But don't be confused. You are able to always reprint 1099s for prior years. That information doesn't get overwritten or anything, so this does not affect the printing of your 1099s. It affects some of the reporting when it comes to smart lists, but it does not affect your 1099 printing. So again, similar to receivables, I can close the fiscal year, I can close the calendar year at separate dates, or I can close them both together if my calendar and fiscal year coincide. So what does the payables year-end close process do? 1099 amounts from the year-to-date column move to the last year column. Fiscal year transfers all other amounts. So amount invoiced by vendor, amount paid, this year versus last year. Those are the items that get updated during the fiscal year-end close. So here's an example. Here's a screenshot of a vendor credit summary window. And just to show you some of the information that will get cleared out when I close my fiscal. And then again, here are some smart list fields. So my amount billed last year, that would be updated when I close my fiscal calendar. But my 1099 amount last year gets updated when I close the calendar year. Similar steps to close payables as we saw with receivables and inventory. We want to post all of our 2016 current year transactions. Make sure any transactions for the new year are saved but not yet posted. Of course, have a good backup. Better safe than sorry. Some more KB articles, similar to receivables, payables is not completely, not fully date sensitive. Again, where it mostly affects you is in your smart list reporting. Just a note, since most of you guys are on 2013 and 2015, you already know about the edit 1099 information window, I assume. No, Mary's shaking her head no. So we do have a utility now that will, so you have options if a vendor was you set up a new vendor in the system and didn't flag them as 1099 in the beginning, there's a utility now that if you switch them to 1099, will go back through and should update their 1099 field. Go back and look at all the transactions throughout the year and update that automatically for you, whereas before you would have to manually go in and adjust those amounts. So
is that functional on 13 too?
I think in R2, so there was a big service pack release that came out maybe 6 months or a year after 2013 was introduced, and I think it was included in that. Do you have that, Jeff? Okay, yeah.
Is there the 1099 form?
Yes.
And you actually have the pre-printed form.
Right. It prints on the pre-printed 3 to a sheet. Oh, no. Yeah, you get the pre-printed forms. Yeah. No, I didn't mean it printed the form. I meant you had to have the form. Yeah. And you guys were shaking your head. I'm like, no? No? Yes. No, you need the pre-printed forms. It does print on the forms. And it should align with the forms. So one of the things that you guys need to be aware of, depending on what version of GP you're on, you want to make sure that you're on the latest service pack. So GP always comes out with a year-end service pack, which mostly affects our payroll clients. However, sometimes in that year-end update, they throw in updates to fixed asset, tax, maximum, minimum things. They also sometimes throw in 1099 updates if they've changed the alignment of the form or added a field. So we try to push that information out to you guys so that you're aware ahead of time. This year, I don't think there were major changes that affected 1099 stuff. We'll talk about that in a later slide. Okay, so fixed assets. How many people are using fixed assets? Okay. How many people are using fixed assets that are on 2013 R2? Okay. So fixed assets should be closed after payables. So again, it's the last in the list: inventory, sales, purchasing, fixed assets. With fixed assets, if you have multiple books, you can close each book separately. So you may have your internal book, which is your internal depreciation expense. You can close that, but maybe keep the tax book open because you need to do some tax adjustments. Just know that if you keep the tax book opened, you will not be able to run depreciation for January of 2017. All of the books have to be closed before you're able to run depreciation in the new year. You were laughing. Oh. So, depending on what version of GP you're on, and sometimes my head just gets a little boggled. So in the newer versions of GP, and I'm not sure if it's 2013 or if it's new in 2015, so it might be 2013 R2, I don't know. But the year-to-date information in fixed assets gets cleared out, and so in the newer versions of GP, you actually now have historical depreciation reports where you can put in a date and run a depreciation report. Prior to the newer versions, you had to run and print all of your fixed asset reports before you closed the module, because once you close the module, all that year-to-date information zeroes out and there was no way to get a report reporting it. So can you run? Okay, so it is 2013 R2, yeah, where that change came out. So if you don't have R2, you are going to definitely want to print all of your fixed asset reports, download any smart lists so that you have a record of that information before the module is closed. And if you guys have questions, what version you're on or anything, just give us a call. We can help figure out, and point you in the right direction. So again, when we close the fixed asset module, the year-to-date depreciation amount is zeroed out for the new year. Cost basis is copied to the beginning year cost field. Life-to-date depreciation is copied to the beginning reserve field, and any salvage value is copied to the beginning salvage. Also, the current fiscal year is increased for each closed book. So it'll say 2017, and then you'll be able to process 2017 transactions. Here is a screenshot of an asset book window. You notice my year-to-date field has now been zeroed out because I've closed my module. And then here is a smart list example. My year-to-date depreciation amounts zeroed out. So what steps do you need to take in fixed assets before we close the year? We want to run depreciation on all assets through the last day of the current year. If you run it, if it's set to December 30th, you're going to get issues and errors. You want to run it through the 31st. Again, if you're on a version of GP prior to 2013 R2, you definitely want to print all of your reports that you will need. Anything the auditors are going to ask for. Again, before we close the module, let's make sure we have a good backup. Does anybody in here use the analytical accounting? Have it turned on? Dana.
You do, right?
Yep, you do. Okay, there's no, in older versions of GP, there was kind of a separate close process we had to do for that, but there's no separate process now for AA. So I'm just mentioning it. The one thing to keep in mind is you want to make sure that AA is installed and enabled on the workstation where you are running the GL close from. You're on the terminal server, so you're okay. General ledger. So a lot of times people will close the modules, again, as close to fiscal or calendar year end as possible, but they keep GL open a little longer, and that's fine. You need to obviously run the GL close before you can produce a balance sheet for 2017. So that's usually the driver when people decide to run the close. So what does the GL year-end close do? The GL year-end close takes all your P&L activity, your net profit or loss for the year, and rolls it up into retained earnings, and then zeroes out all your P&L accounts. It also moves all of the balance sheet ending balances to the beginning balance column for the next year. So Carrie pointed out in when she was doing tips and tricks that you really want to, before you close the GL, review all of your GL accounts, run a smart list, make sure that each account is set up properly. Balance sheet accounts are set up as balance sheet, P&L accounts are set up as profit and loss, because if you have a P&L account that is mistakenly set up as a balance sheet account, that amount is not going to roll into retained earnings. That balance is going to roll forward, and then you're going to call us, and we're going to fix it for you. And that's okay, but if you can, you know, catch it before that point, that would be good. So again, retained earnings is the only balance sheet account that should have a different beginning balance than the ending balance from last year. We can also, during the GL year-end close, we can remove inactive GL accounts. We can also remove any unused segments. So if you had set up some segments, thinking that you were going to add a new department or a new location, you know, under the segment setup, and then wound up not adding accounts, during the GL year-end close, we can remove those if you wish. So again, very important to review your GL account list and make sure all accounts are set up properly. There's a good KB article on year-end closing procedures for GL. This is huge. You always, always, always want a backup before you close GL. And just as important, you want to make sure that we have enough space on the server for the year-end close process to process, because we have run into issues in the past where the disk space on the server was so small that during the year-end close process, the database like expands and then contracts. But when it expands, it needs the space. Otherwise, it crashes. And then people's GL is like half closed, and it's a big mess. So again, if you need help, you know, figuring out if you have enough space, you could call us and we'll do a quick check and let you know. It's also a good idea to perform the year-end close on the server just because it runs faster. Now that we have the progress bar, it's not as scary because you can tell it's actually doing something. In the older versions of GP, there was no progress bar. I'm sure some of you remember, and the box would just sit there and hang, and you didn't know if it was working or not. You'd click around, then things would get all locked up. Then again, then we'd get a call, help, help. So if you are on an older version and you don't have the status bar, it does appear to hang, but just let it run. Don't touch it, just let it go. So here's a list of great articles. If you have any questions, need any additional help. Does anybody close to divisional retained earnings? And you do, don't you? You close to your funds, yeah. Okay, so do I need to install the year-end update? Like I said a little bit earlier, every year-end GP or Microsoft comes out with a service pack called the year-end update. The year-end update includes any previously released service packs, hot fixes, compliance updates. So it is a service pack. Very important for our payroll clients, obviously, because it affects payroll. So here's a list of what this year's year-end update, here's what it impacts. So as you can see, there was a bit of a depreciation change. I want to say it's with luxury autos, though, so I don't know that it may affect a lot of people. There was a 1096 form change, but I think it's very slight. And then, again, a small change if you have any 1099 interest vendors. So for the most part, not huge changes this year. So who in here does payroll and HR and GP? Okay. Do you guys have to worry about ACA? Did you guys update it last year? Go through the whole ACA setup? So if you're on an older version of GP prior to 2013R2, you won't be able to track any ACA information. Okay, so payroll year-end close. Again, independent from the other modules. The payroll year-end close should be done after all current year pay runs are complete. Make a backup, and before processing any 2017 payroll. So the payroll year-end close process includes, it creates the year-end wage file, which contains the annual wage info. So you print that off, you print off your W-2s, all of that. Make a backup, follow the process. Again, a lot of you guys have signed off on statements of work for the service pack, and then there are hours if you included, if you need some help or want some help with either the payroll close portion or just the GL, other modules portion of the close. So here's some key points to remember with payroll. You want to print the year-end wage report. You want to edit and print your W-2s. Prior to processing your first pay run of 2017, you're going to want to install the payroll tax update, because that's going to update your payroll taxes for the next year. Here's some helpful links if you need additional information or help with payroll. Okay, so year-end close recap. Again, we want to close the modules in the order listed. We want to close things as close to your year-end as possible, both fiscal and calendar. So I have this, and I know the red is a little big, but many years ago, and I still get questions every now and then. So people have asked in the past, do I need to change my GP system date when I close the purchasing or the inventory or the sales module, thinking that it will retroactively close as of whatever date I put in here? No, we don't need to do this, because it doesn't. It's always going to close as of the day you actually run it. It doesn't matter what your GP system date is, so don't be fooled. Here's a list of good resources. Again, there's a link for each module, and it goes through very detailed instructions for each module. You can go through step by step. So if you have any questions, you can contact GP support at turnkeytech.com.